Welcome. My name is Kate Harmon, and I'm the Director of Cross-Campus Engagement for the Lundquist Center for Entrepreneurship. And today on our Getting Ahead series, I'm excited to have with us Mark Edlen. Mark is the co-founder and chairman of Gerding Edlen, one of the nation's leading real estate investment and development firms with a specific focus around building sustainable communities. So welcome. Thanks for joining us today, Mark.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
I'd like to start off by sharing, having you share a little bit about your college years. I know you're a double duck, and also you were the first in your family to go to college. So take us back to that time period. What were you involved in at UO? And what sort of things were you hoping your career might look like as you were studying at the University of Oregon?
Well, I wish I'd had that much foresight. You're giving me more credit than you should. So I was very, very fortunate. I stumbled into college, and when I was in high school, I had a full-time job and was making good money. Always kind of a type A personality. And I literally, on a whim, drove down Eugene to check it out and applied. And those days, all you had to do was be breathing and have some sort of a GPA, and you could get in. Today, I could never get in, probably. But at any rate, I've always been entrepreneurial, always interested in business. I remember back when I was a kid, and I'd used to, in a neighborhood subdivision, when they'd come in and drop the trees, I'd go in with a handsaw and I'd cut them up and split them and take them around the neighborhood in a wheelbarrow and sell the wood. And I was always interested in the houses they're building and walking through them and as they're under construction. And so I think I had an interest in real estate early on. Which kind of led to where I am today, I suppose. Down in Eugene, the first year I went broke, and I ended up going back to Portland and took some night classes at PSU, or day classes at PSU, and had a night job, and saved enough money to come back in the fall of my sophomore year. And then I was down in Eugene year-round after that. It was a great experience for me. I really enjoyed it. Freshman year, I really struggled trying to figure it out because when I was in high school, I really didn't have to study. And as I say, I had a full-time job. In fact, I worked a night crew. And but by the time I was a sophomore, I really started to get more serious about it. Got involved in the business school. Always interested in business. I had the great fortune to grow up in the Northwest in Portland. And enjoyed the outdoors and did a lot of backpacking stuff as a high schooler. And I got involved in the outdoor program down in Eugene, did an awful lot of rock climbing, a fair amount of kayaking and whatnot, and some mountaineering. And I think kind of my love of the environment and the outdoors really evolved out of that. I was on the ski team, which was a lot of fun too. And, I had a great experience. And so I tell people I probably learned as much in the outdoor program as I did in the business school. I was down there the year Nixon was impeached. And I think I was one credit short of having a minor in political science. And I remember when the impeachment trials were going on, I was taking the presidency at the time. And we'd run to class in the morning to, talk about what the latest news was. And so it was a lot of fun.
That's
I'm
awesome.
very grateful for the experience.
That's awesome. And your degree is in finance, and you got your MBA in finance. Is that
Correct. Right? I got my MBA in marketing. So
okay, very good.
Not a lot of diversity there, right?
Yeah. No, that's a very good compliment, the two,
sure.
Marketing and finance. So, well, then share with us a little bit about how you got into real estate, and maybe talk a little bit about the various verticals in your company and how those sort of developed over time.
Sure. When I first got out of graduate school, I went to work for Xerox, which in those days had one of the two best sales and sales management training programs. Xerox and IBM is a great education in corporate America. And I was very fortunate to be successful early on. And I was kind of bored out of my mind, though. And I actually started a residential real estate company while I was at Xerox and grew that to 30 employees. And so that's how I got my foot into real estate, if you will. And I was at Xerox for probably 2 years before I left. And then the recession of '79 hit. That was the year I got married. And I remember the fall of '79 when Walker, turned the spigot off. And it was pretty amazing. And from there, I went to work for Cushman Wakefield and 1980, and I was there for 15 years. Was a commercial broker, office broker. It's a great opportunity. You know, it's kind of one of those deals only in America. You're limited to how hard you want to work, your creativity and your ethics. And the income is not unlimited, but it's, you know, it can be very, very good. And I got involved in 1984. I did my first build-to-suit. I did a lot of tenant rep work, which in those days was kind of a novelty because everybody represented landlords, and I enjoyed representing tenants because you really got to be more of a part of the senior management team, and you had the opportunity to work with CFOs and CEOs and managing partners of firms, and that was a lot of fun. In '84, I did my first build-to-suit. It was actually for the Oregon State Bar. And I figured if I could survive a board of 20 attorneys, I could survive just about anything. And found the dirt, found the contractor, found the architect, and pulled the whole thing together and really enjoyed it. And then the next year, I had the opportunity to build a suit for KeyBank when they bought a local bank here in Oregon, PacWest Bank at the time. And they needed to do a data center. And I sat in the job trailer for a year and kind of figured it out. You know, it's not really rocket science. And from there, I started doing quite a few build-to-suits, and that's how I met my co-founding partner, Bob Gerding, who's also a Duck. We did a few transactions together, and it was one of those things where the chemistry hit, and we both had an incredible trust of each other. And we didn't have a business plan. I know I'm not supposed to say that, but we knew in our gut intuitively that we could make it work. And so we started a company and went from there. We started out, really, we kind of had 3 lines of business in the early years. We did quite a bit of build-to-suit work, which coming out of the service industry, the brokerage business. And then we did spec development, office predominantly. And then we got into doing public-private partnerships. We always embraced the environmental side of things. And, you know, in 1994, when we started the company, I look back, it's kind of laughable, some of the things we did around the environment, but it was really educational. And we're very left-leaning for our industry. And so we got involved in doing a lot of public-private partnerships, which kind of led to where we are today.
That's great. That's great. Talk to us a little bit about when you and Bob got together. How did you sort of, see each other's skill sets? I mean, how did you complement each other? And then how did you, each of you sort of define your roles and responsibilities within the company?
Yeah, we didn't really do that. But Bob was a PhD biochemist, which is pretty much a straight line path into commercial real estate development, right? Not so much. Bob was probably the best big thinker I've ever met. And we were both, ethics is huge. I mean, it's number one in my book, always has been, and it was with Bob as well. Bob passed quite some time ago. He got sick in like 2001 or 2. But we both kind of did our book of business separately, so to speak, and then we'd come together at the end of the day, and we'd go out once a week and go have dinner and, bottle of red wine, and we'd solve all the world's problems. I don't know if you ever saw the Spielberg cartoon, Pinky and the Brain, 2 lab rats deciding how they're going to solve all the world's problems. And that's what we would do at those dinners. And we knew absolutely everything about each other, our family. We didn't socialize a lot together, but we knew everything about each other. We knew everything about every transaction. And invariably, if we had an opportunity, we had a problem, one of us might have the opportunity problem. We'd come and sit down in the other one's office, talk it through, and always we came out with a different opportunity or different solution. And it was always a better solution than we started with. So we just had a tremendous amount of collaboration. We could almost finish each other's sentences. And it was one of those very, very rare, I think, rare opportunities in life to have a partnership like that.
That's great. That's great. I know one of your keys to your success is your ability to identify and convert customers. Share with us a little bit about your strategy or process for attracting customers and acquiring them.
Yeah. I get a lot of young people that come through and want to do an informational interview, which I always do because we all got started someplace somehow, right? And I think the highest value anybody can bring to an organization is the ability to deliver a customer, deliver to the organization, satisfy that customer's needs, and ideally over-satisfy their needs. And I think, out of that, I see it today, people that I worked with 20, 30 years ago that still call up and want to discuss this topic or that one or this problem and are looking for solutions. You see, if you're dealing with somebody at senior level, by the time a problem, and it's usually a problem, gets to that senior person, to him or her, it's usually a big problem because somebody else or 2 or 3 levels down below couldn't solve it. And so from a marketing or sales perspective, I think a positive attitude is huge. It's more fun to work with positive people. It's more fun to work with problem solvers, or I suppose rather than people talk about their problems and their issues. So I think everybody is looking for people that can help them capitalize on an opportunity or solve problems in their business. And the more fun people are to work with, the more you want to work with them again and again.
That makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. I know that Gerding Edlen, has a national reputation for building sustainable LEED certified buildings. Can you discuss why sustainability has been a core value? I mean, you touched on it a little bit earlier, but how are you able to integrate it really as a core value in your company, and maybe give us a little bit of context as to how the landscape of sustainable building has changed over the 20 plus years you've been involved with it.
Sure. Again, I look back what we did 25 years ago, and it's pretty laughable looking back on it today. But I think it was just a core belief of ours that there's been too much environmental degradation that's occurred. You look at the pandemic that we're in now, and you read about Venice and how the waters have cleared up. You look at some of the cities and how the air is cleared up. And I think as a business person, we have a responsibility, not just to make money for our shareholders, and not just to pay our employees and our vendors, and not just serve our customers, but also do it in a fashion that hopefully, we can leave the earth better than we found it. That's a big task. And I think for us, I look at our product, and it's not like the computer you and I are using here this morning that's we're going to keep for 2 to 5 years and then dispose of it. And you look at the building that you're sitting in, more likely than not, or you look at some of the buildings on campus that have been there for 100 years. And I think of our product as one that's going to have an impact on a community for decades and decades and decades. And if it's built right, over 100 years. And so I think as in our industry, we have a choice. We can design and develop and operate the least expensive buildings we can possibly build. And they're going to do a couple things that I think are negative. One is I think we have a responsibility community we work within, not only to deliver and design an architecturally interesting building, one that adds to a community as opposed to detracts from a community. And your architectural school, I'm a big fan of architecture. I think art and architecture are much the same. And that if we have a building that's designed to fit in a neighborhood and is interesting, it's kind of like a piece of sculpture. Somebody might walk up to that sculpture and look at it and say, that's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Somebody else might say it's the coolest thing I've ever seen. But the best thing that could happen is those two people stop and take them out of their day, and maybe they talk about that piece of sculpture. I think architecture is very much the same. So I think the design of our buildings and how they're thoughtfully placed in our community, it's important to what we do. And then on the environmental side, how we design and engineer the buildings to operate is really important, from the amount of energy they use, as well as the water they use and the sewage that they dump into our sewer systems. I'm very, very excited. We just broke ground recently on what will be the largest living building to have been built to date, certainly in the United States, if not the world. And it's a net zero energy, water, and sewage building. It's an office building in downtown Portland. And so that's very exciting for me to be late in my career to have the opportunity to be involved in something like that. And then I think kind of the third thing that we're starting to delve into more, that we were starting to before the last recession, and then it was just about survival. And now thinking more about our food stream, if you will. So where do our products come from? And if you think about, we could design the most environmentally sensitive building that you can think of in terms of how it operates, but where do the materials come from? And if you think about it, concrete and steel are a pretty ugly process, and they create a tremendous amount of pollution, both in the manufacture as well as the hauling of it to the job site. And so we are really starting to delve more into cross-laminated timber, thinking of as a renewable resource. I'm a co-chair at EcoTrust here in Portland, and we spend a lot of time working in rural communities. And the idea of, ideally from Oregon, and better yet from tribal lands, harvesting timber that's been grown right and harvested right as opposed to clear cut, bring it to the mill, have it milled in Oregon, deliver it to our job site in Oregon, and we're using a renewable resource, and we're also doing it in a fashion that its long-term operations will be highly efficient. And to me, that's kind of where we've got to go. So I kind of feel like we've seen the operations side, the reduce the energy usage, water usage, so on and so forth. You know, to me, that's just kind of common business practice today. But I think delving more into our supply chain is where we really need to go.
That's great. Great to hear. In terms of the history of your company, I know that in 2004, you started to look outside of Portland to expand, and you ended up expanding into the Midwest, into Chicago, into the East Coast, into Boston. Talk to us a little bit about what your strategy was for expansion and how has that impacted the overall success of Gerding Edlen?
Well, again, we're pretty organic. And I would say we've always been acquisitive and inquisitive. We've always been curious. And I used to joke that we never saw a deal that we didn't like. Not the best strategy probably, but we started expanding out of Portland because our size became such that we became worried about being too concentrated in one market. And we had growitis. And so we went down to LA and started doing work down there. We went to Seattle. Then we went to San Francisco. We've been in Salt Lake and developed there. And then more recently, Boston and Chicago. And it's been really interesting. We're very fortunate to be from Portland. I think Portland, while I feel like today we're hanging on by our fingernails, but Portland's been in the forefront in a lot of areas around the built environment, whether it be alternative transportation. One of the things we used to joke about is we want to kill the car. We want to be in communities where people can walk or bike or take alternative transportation, or car is the last choice. And some of the design things around sustainability and whatnot that Portland, I think, has been on the forefront of, we've really benefited from. When we went to other cities like Boston, I went in and met with the head of the redevelopment agency who works for the mayor. He says, "I know you." And I said, "What do you mean you know me?" He said, "Well, I've walked your buildings, and your planning director at the time, Gil Kelly, and I are good friends, and how can we help you in Boston?" So very, very clearly, our practices that we had developed and learned in Oregon, as we expanded outside of Portland, that really made it easier for us. I would say, in hindsight, I think we probably would have done just as well to not grow, stay in Portland. I would say one of the downsides of expanding like we did is a lot of people sitting in airplane seats. And there's a cost to that. There's a cost in terms of time. There's a cost in terms of families. And I would say that that's probably the biggest downside of that expansion outside the Portland market. On the other hand, it's kind of, again, one of those only in America deals. Never would have dreamt it. Never would have thought it. But what a fun time, and what a great, series of opportunities that we were able to see over the last 25 years.
Well, and I know that your reputation too has really expanded the whole sustainable building, industry outside of this region and stuff. So that's kudos to you all for being able to really lead that.
If I can, I would say the ecosystem that we live within in Portland or Oregon, you know, the engineers, the architects and contractors that were willing to come along, we couldn't have done it without their expertise. And the other thing I would say also is I'm a big believer in public-private partnerships. And without having the cooperation from the state of Oregon, the city of Portland, and other municipalities who were equally interested in pursuing different options around sustainability, whether it be energy or water or transportation, we wouldn't have got there by ourselves, that's for sure. I mean, it really takes a collaborative effort.
That's great. Great to hear. I'm curious, given the incredible capital intensive nature of what you do, what kind of financial best practices have you been able to implement and have led to your company's success?
It's a good question. You know, when Bob and I started the company, we had been successful in our careers and that we had, were making good incomes, but we didn't have wealth or family behind us. And that has always been a big driver in our capital strategy. And you think about these projects, and more recently in our large scale projects, a typical deal is $100 to $150 million. So we started off with local high net worth people that knew us, knew our reputation. And most of those people are still with us today, 25 years later, interestingly. A few of them and us are aging out, which is kind of an interesting phenomenon. And then I would say, as we really started to grow after we did the brewery blocks in Portland, which was a very large scale project, we kind of moved to more of the household names, institutions that were large capital providers. On the equity side, the debt side has always been pretty straightforward. I mean, if you're able to repay the money and you deliver, the lenders love you and they want to do business with you. And we're very fortunate to have long-term relationships with 2 or 3 of the large national lenders. On the equity side, though, as we got larger, you know, doing the high net worth individuals became more difficult. Just so many of them, and the deal size was so big. So we went with a lot of life companies and whatnot. And then prior to the 2008 recession, even that got cumbersome because of the volume of transactions we were doing. And we're moving towards a fund model, which is where we've been for the last 10 years. And we have 4 discretionary funds that we've raised with institutional investors that we invest that money on their behalf in the various markets that we're in. All of our transactions historically have really been value add, and that's been a challenge, in that those deals are a 5 to 7 year type of program as opposed to a long-term hold. And I would say that's been one failure of our company, is we have not been successful at transitioning into long-term holds. So in our business, the short term, you can make good money and you can have a big impact. On the other hand, in terms of generational, thinking generationally, a long-term hold is where you really need to be, in my opinion.
Interesting. Well, you mentioned the 2008 Great Recession. I know that period had a big impact on your business, in that you really sought to sort of redevelop your business model. Can you share with us a little bit about what that looked like and how that environment impacted your sort of pivot in your business?
Sure. It was awful. We never had a deal go bad. We never lost a dime until 2009. And we had 3 or 4 deals go bad. That was very, very challenging. In many respects, I think I personally probably would have been better to close the doors, but it just wasn't in our DNA to do that. And so, again, I mentioned ethics early on as the number one thing. When it started to look bad, we went to our lenders and our equity partners early and often and let them know what we were seeing. And I think that transparency is what enabled us to survive that downturn. If we had not been transparent from the very beginning through 2009 and 10, I don't think we'd be here today. And it's interesting, all those same lenders and equity partners that we were working with, those 3 or 4 deals that went bad, they're our partners today. And we continue to do business together. And I just can't overemphasize, you know, ethics and transparency is number one.
Great, that's good. I know that over the last several years, the role and impact of community on the urban environment has played a really significant role in your company, in that you've now more recently self-selected what kind of projects you want to insert your time and money into. Share with us a little bit about how community impact has increasingly become a focus for your company.
Yeah, going way back, again, we're pretty left-leaning politically, but going way back, we 20 years ago started doing public-private partnerships, and we just kind of fell into it. One I like to joke about is we built the city's permit and planning center, which is probably not a bad customer to have, being the business we're in. But we did probably a dozen solar roofs for Portland Public at one time or another. We've done affordable housing going back 20 years ago in public-private partnerships. And coming out of the 2008 recession, excuse me, we just saw the divide between the haves and have-nots get wider and wider before even COVID and the recent unrest with you know, the Floyd murder and whatnot. And so I really started to think about social equity and social justice in a different fashion. For example, going back, the environmental deal and design was kind of the be-all and end-all. Then we started to think about sustainability as a subset of building community. Thinking about, it's one thing to design buildings to be highly sustainable, but if we can make it easier for people to change their lifestyles such that they can live more sustainably, as well as live in a more sustainable, work in a more sustainable environment, that was really where we had to go. And coming out 2008, the income disparities, and then we started to see bigger and bigger the impact of drugs and alcohol, chronically homeless folks, mental health. And I think we started to disinvest in those as a society, you know, 30 years ago. And I think we're seeing the impact today in the last 5 years with the street scene that we see in almost every city, virtually every city of any size. I believe the next couple decades, the biggest issue facing cities is going to be social equity. And this is before the pandemic and, again, the recent unrest. And I think this is only going to add more fuel to the fire. So over the years, we've probably done close to 1,000 units that are low-income housing tax credit units. We have 3 of those projects going today. We've done now, I think we're on our 4th drug and alcohol treatment center. Not exactly a mainline business we're in, and we don't make much money doing it. We hope not to lose money doing it. And then more recently, we've just launched an affordable housing fund in conjunction with Meyer Memorial Trust, where we're going out and acquiring what people refer to as naturally occurring affordable housing, which is housing that it might be 1980s vintage, that is renting to folks making 60 to 70% of median family income. More typically, somebody like us would buy it, put $25,000 a door in it, take a C+ building and try to make an A- building, jack the rents up, and those people are hourly folks and they're on the street. And so our strategy is to buy it, keep it affordable. Our pitch to investors is try to sell it as a bond, and that we're not building anything, so there's no construction risk. It's already leased up, so there's no lease up risk. And we're actually finding in this very moment as we talk that it's actually a bit counter-cyclical, and that the inventory that we've acquired, we made our first 2 acquisitions in the first quarter, and we've actually seen our occupancy increase, and amazingly, our collections are running 95% plus in this downturn. So our investor proposition is a 4% coupon, and that's it. From our perspective, it's probably 80% philanthropic and 20% for-profit. We couldn't find a model that had been done like this before. We spent 2 years with Meyer building it, and now we're out trying to execute on it. So in our business, we've really taken it and separated it in that we've got our fund business, if you will, which is often doing its deal. And then we've got more of our mission-aligned business, which is low-income housing tax credit, affordable housing, drugs and alcohol treatment centers, and affordable housing that I just talked about, that we're really focused on that. And I think coming out of this recession, you know, I think the demand for workforce housing is going to be huge. You know, we saw home ownership dip after the 2008, 9, 10 recession. started to tick up a little bit, maybe a point and a half in the last 4, maybe 3 to 5 years. I think we're going to see it drop again as people are income stressed. So.
Interesting. Well, interesting. Well, my last question to you, if for a student that wants to potentially follow your successful career path, as you look back over your own career, what kind of advice or recommendations do you feel like that has served you well that could help a student might be looking for their first entry-level job now?
Well, obviously the first one is do something that you love. Because if you love what you do, everything else becomes easy. I think, again, the 3 keys to being successful, and I've never figured out how to do it without a lot of hard work, put in a lot of hours. I like to work. I'm at an age where I probably ought to be retired, but I think I'd either be alcoholic or suicidal if I did. So, do what you love. So the three keys, in my opinion, are number 1, your integrity, your ethics. Number 2, your creativity. And number 3, how hard do you want to work? And I think, if you can put those 3 in balance, and you might be in balance for a week and then you're out of balance, but that's something we all juggle with, whether it's work, life, family balance. But to me, those 3 are the big keys to being successful.
Mark Edlen is the co-founder and chairman of Gerding Edlen. Thank you so much for joining us today, Mark.
Thank you.